Assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome to today's episode of the Ahmed Bassal Podcast. My very special guest today, his name is Faraz, but we don't know his surname yet. We're going to find out. Before we get into that, don't forget to like and subscribe. Turn on your notifications so you know when we release a new episode. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are you, Habibi?
Alhamdulillah.
It's awkward trying to shake hands without bumping the mic.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Now, your surname, let's start there. So is it Faraz Amin or is it Faraz Nomani?
The full name is Faraz Nomani. Right.
Faraz Amin Nomani.
Faraz Amin Nomani. Okay. That's the full name. So it's just a quirk. The last name Nomani, it is actually, it traces its history back to Imam Abu Hanifa. So a lot of people in India who claimed his lineage basically took his name, which was An-Nu'man. His name was actually Nu'man.
Oh, mashallah.
And they turned it into Nu'mani. That relating to An-Nu'man. And obviously India being sort of largely Hanafi, a lot of the scholars and ulama there, they took that as a title, and then it became like a tribal thing. Like millions of people had that.
So is there any like mythology in your family about?
I don't think so. I don't think there's any pretension that we're related or that we trace that lineage. Look, I mean, if I was to do a family tree back a couple of generations, there might be someone who sort of claims that yes, we go back that way. But my grandfather never said anything. My father's never said that. We're sort of Normandy blood, like literally. So that's it. And Amin was my grandfather's name, rahimahullah, and that basically just was used at certain places because my parents sometimes used Amin and sometimes Normani on different applications and high school names and the rest. So it just became confusing for people. But sometimes I use one, sometimes I use the other. But there's nothing more to it.
Because if you were related, we would have brought out the red carpet.
Oh, of course.
Would have done all that stuff. So nice to have you with us, Habibi.
Thank you so much, bro. Jazakumullah khair. It's a pleasure to be here.
The pleasure is ours. Now I've got some Turkish Apple Tea for you to try. Yes. Do you wanna have a sip and tell us what you think? Now Turkish Apple Tea did not sponsor today's episode.
Yeah, no, let's have a crack.
It can sponsor next episode, no problem.
That is awesome.
Yeah,
it's a bit sweet. It's like hot apple juice almost.
Yes, it is,
right?
isn't it?
What do you think?
Bismillah. Oh,
it's good though. Really good. Opens up the throat in the morning and the nasal cavities.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah. So we're going to smash through those.
Yeah.
Akhi, thanks for joining us on the show. We've been friends for a number of years. I've got a few sort of things to go through with you. But really on a very sincere note, I want to start off by thanking you for joining us today and agreeing to talk about your children. So both your children, both boys, both have autism. Now, I got to admit, I don't know much about autism at all, but I have in the last few years just been exposed to a lot of people who have children with disabilities, family members with disabilities, because I work with some NDIS providers. So I really wanted you to just educate us a little bit today on exactly what it is. And then I'm going to ask you some experiences about your boys.
Yeah, sure. So look, autism is the shortened version, I guess, of the disorder known as autism spectrum disorder, ASD. Right. And the word spectrum there signifies that it can be quite a spectrum of disability, right? So let's say if you've got a physical disability, let's say you're an amputee, right? You don't have a right leg, you don't have a right leg. There's no real spectrum there in terms of,
You can't have part of a semi-amputee.
With spectrum disorders and psychological disorders, there's a recognition that you can be quite mildly impaired all the way to quite heavily impaired. Right. There are, of course, requisite elements of the diagnosis that you must meet in order to be classified as being on the autism spectrum. But, as long as you tick those off in some way, then you have this disorder. Now, the tricky part of it is that, and those three things, and I'll mention them, there's three, right? One is difficulty with communication, right? Number two is difficulty with socialization, right?
Okay.
And number three is repetitive tendencies and behaviors. Those are the three. Now, where do these three come from? These three come from DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Manual of Psychological and Psychiatric Conditions, version 5. This is really the global Bible for psychiatric and psychological conditions. Right?
Let's not say Bible.
Well, you get the idea in the metaphorical sense. So it really is the diagnostic manual that psychiatrists and psychologists all over the world use. It's developed by the American Psychiatry Association, and it gets updated once every decade or 2 decades.
So it's a framework.
It's a framework. It's more than a framework. It's almost like a legislative book, as it were, right? That if this is met by a person, they have this condition. If this and this is met, they have that condition. And obviously, it's hugely controversial because it's quite often lagging behind the research, and quite often the way that it seeks to look at certain conditions are very one-dimensional. And of course, as with, I guess, all of modern medicine, where it's about, ticking certain boxes and therefore you're diagnosed with something, the way you then go about looking at therapies or solutions to those problems then become quite sort of bound within the Western medicinal framework of give a pill or this is how we do it. And you can't look outside of that holistically to the body. So there's a lot to be said about that. But in a nutshell, that's those are the three sort of pillars that need to be present for someone to be diagnosed with autism. Now, the trouble is when it comes to communicative impairment, you could have someone who's slightly socially awkward, all the way to someone, let's say with really, really impaired autistic kids who literally cannot relate to another human being. They would not register that there is another human in this room. Wow. For them, it's the same as a sofa, right? That's how impaired they can be. And we'll talk about sort of where my kids fit on that just to sort of make it more practical and real. But this is the problem with spectrum disorders, is that for each of those three, you could have people on very, very opposite ends of that spectrum. And what you'll have is you'll meet the diagnosis. So you will have an autistic person who you couldn't tell. You said they've got a few quirks, right? And that leads to its own issues because now there's this, as you know, in broader society at the moment, we have a movement for everything, right? And so there's a movement called the neurodiversity movement, which is basically advocating for these people who have the slightest impairments. And they get seen as, this is autism. Many of them often have these skills called savant skills, right? They're really good at something. And therefore people come to associate autism with, he's going to be a scholar, he's going to be amazing at something. Right up and on the opposite spectrum, if you've got people who are severely impaired in all three of those, they are really, really disabled and severely impaired in what they can and can't do in life. And oftentimes with autistic kids, and this is actually now more of what's happening, they are intellectually very, very disabled. So you've got the same condition covering people who are waving the flag of neurodiversity, right? All the way to people who literally cannot drink from a cup of water their entire lives.
Without help.
Yes, right? And they're given the same condition, right? Now, that is what it is. I mean,
it must be a very challenging environment to sort of wade through.
100%. And initially for us, this was the biggest confusion, is that, for me, I was sort of looking at it, and in the early part of my kids' conditions, it was like, they're just the same as everyone. They're just a bit diverse. And as time went on, I was like, hang on a second. No, they're not. Like, they're actually, at least one of my sons, he's severely, severely disabled. How could this neurodiversity movement that's sort of representing people with, great talents, but with a little bit of a psychological quirk or a personality, how can I relate to those? I need to advocate for my kids very differently. They're fully disabled. Like if I died tomorrow, my child could not look after himself. So I cannot relate to this movement whatsoever, and they're claiming to represent autistic people. So you can see how this starts to become really, really practically challenging.
So neurodiversity movement, I can see you're not on that bandwagon, and your kids are very different. But let's come back to the neurodiversity movement. So what are your boys' names?
So my boys' names are Isa and Sulaiman.
MashaAllah.
Isa is 9 years of age now, going on 10 within the next sort of half a year, so he's 9.5. We named him Isa because my wife's name is Maryam. So Isa ibn Maryam. We thought it was beautiful. So that's Isa, and Sulaiman is literally 2 years younger than him.
Okay.
And he's therefore 7.5. He's going to go on 8.
Okay, so Isa and Sulaiman. Okay. So now you're okay for me to ask you questions about
absolutely.
And look, I really think for everybody watching, this is really something that everyone needs to be aware of, because definitely you are walking past every single day people who are dealing with, affected by all of this. So and I really invited you here today more as a learning experience for me to better understand. So at what age were the boys, or at what age was Isa when you first had a sort of inkling, yourself and your wife, that maybe we need to get something checked here?
Great question. So as first-time parents, we didn't know what we didn't know, right? Now, obviously, we have nephews or nieces or cousins or young kids that we've been around, but it's very different when you're a parent. You're in the day in, day out. Whereas when you've got a relative who's got a kid and they're cute and you cuddle and kiss and stuff, they come to your house, you do that stuff, they go away. Maybe you spend some holidays together, go away. You're not really in the day-to-day of what development should look like for a neurotypical child, right? With Isa, because we were first-time parents, and because we weren't sort of the really obsessively by-the-book type parents who were like reading the books on development, by 12 months, these milestones need to be ticked off, and then 15 months this, and it took us a while to sort of pick up that something wasn't quite right. When I say a while, I mean until he was about 1.5, until he was 2, things seemed to be going well. 2 years of age, right? In the sense that he was developing vocabulary, right? He was being able to label things, right? Which I'll come to. He was walking, running, he was picking that stuff up. He seemed to care about adults around him. And sometimes that's a problem in autism. So it's a telltale sign when it's not there, sometimes even younger than 2 years of age.
Oh, okay.
But between the age of 2 and about 2.25, 2.5, he started going backwards.
Okay.
And what I mean, and this is actually a huge sign of autism. It's called regression. Regression in the skills that a autistic child has developed or is not developing anymore. Regression in the sense of losing some abilities that he had gained.
Sorry, do you mean losing vocabulary?
Yes.
Or?
So in his case, it was vocabulary, but also, there was a couple of things. Let me talk about vocabulary first.
Right.
So this was a kid who, and again, these are the slight peculiarities that we as parents didn't know about, but in hindsight, they were there. At the age of 18, he had a prodigious vocabulary, a vocabulary unusually large for a kid his age. He knew all the letters of the alphabet, all the things that he used to sometimes be given the opportunity to watch on YouTube. My wife used to read to him shapes, alphabet, letters, colors, animals, etc. He would and he could label them. So if you said to him, "What's this?" he would say, "This is a lion." "What's this?" "This is an apple." "This is a banana." And he knew that more than kids his age should have. And
so from your point of view at this stage, he's ahead of the curve.
That's right. It's like, oh, this is going to be an amazing kid. My du'as have come true and all of that. I used to, on my phone, type in things like apple, banana, and he would actually say it. And people were weirded out by the fact that this kid was able to read letters at that age.
Yeah.
So there was something visual in his recognition system that was there. And again, with a lot of autistic kids, they say that they've got slight imbalances in certain areas. So that was clearly an early imbalance, right? Which we thought was a sign of great things to come, but But between that 2 and 2.5, he started losing his vocabulary. He stopped telling us as readily the words that he knew. And at a certain point, he stopped actually, when we would sort of prompt him, he stopped actually saying what it was. Now we thought, he's having a bad day, he's
in a bad mood,
tired, whatever.
Yeah.
But the other thing that really fell off a cliff, which in hindsight we just didn't know what to attribute to, was his sleep. Right? His sleep fell off really badly. And, again, as a young person, like, it's terrible twos, people, you hear stuff about that. But almost from the point that it was 2 and maybe more like 20 months, right? He started waking up at around dawn time, Fajr time, 4 or 5 a.m. And he would not go to sleep again until 8. Now, at that stage, he was very young. So
it's a long day for a young kid.
It is, exactly right. So, and he started doing it readily, like every single day. And as I said to you, the gap between the two kids is 2, right? So just when he was turning 2, he was doing this. Me and my wife were very involved with the younger son who was about to be born. So we left him with his grandparents, either my parents or my wife's parents, right? And then they would have to do the whole sort of, Asa's woken up, he's just sort of prancing around his cot. We sort of let him just do that. And then we had to get up and rock him back to sleep around 8 or 9. And at that stage, it was easy. He used to go back to sleep. But it was something that we should have picked up on in hindsight, right? And his energy level started to deplete. But it wasn't until when the rubber really hit the road was when we went on, literally when he was 2.5, we went on an international trip, my wife and I.
Right.
Coming off the back of certain things that I got myself into from a work perspective. I was between jobs and there were some things that happened there. Interesting stories in themselves, maybe for another time. But we went on this what should have been fantastic international trip, and it was, alhamdulillah. Turkey, Britain, Spain.
Mashallah, beautiful.
And we did that with 2 young kids, which in hindsight was just absolutely crazy, especially with kids who ended up being autistic. Yes,
you're brave.
But certain things happened on that trip, which again, if we had been more educated as parents, we would know that this is not how things should be. So, for example, we went via courier to Britain, and he cried literally the entire 8 hours from Seoul to London. Right, and we thought, and this had actually been leading in a couple of weeks into this trip, where he would wake up at 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning and he would just cry. And we thought, it's teething, right? It's teething. And Bonjela, the little thing, Bonjela, and Nurofen. And everyone around us telling it, look, it was hard for us as well. Teething is difficult, blah blah blah. But I'm thinking, he's yelling his lungs out at 3 or 4 a.m. How can the pain be that bad, right? But anyways, you suppress that. I was busy sort of moving between jobs and planning this trip and so
look, it's easy when 100 people are telling you, it's teething, it happens.
That's right.
You kind of just take it face value, right?
Exactly right. But on this trip, I remember on this A380 that we were on, the Super Jumbo, and I'm just holding him and carrying him back and forth from the plane, back and forth, and I'm like, man, this is exhausting, right? This is going to be such a challenging trip. Anyways, we somehow got there, and and again, we attributed it to jet lag, but his sleep cycle was completely flipped on its head. I remember in the sometimes it was Airbnb, sometimes it was hotels, sometimes it was very nice hotels. My wife and I are trying to get some sleep, having gone to sleep late after we did the touring for the day or met friends in these different locations. And, 11 o'clock we go to sleep, and at 4 a.m., lo and behold, Isa is up in his little temporary cot or whatever the hotel had provided us with. And he's crying, right? And we're just shoving Nurofen down this kid's throat, and he's up until 9 a.m. And then he goes to sleep after being exhausted crying for this long.
Right.
Sometimes he wouldn't cry as much, but and then we have to sort of alter our schedule because we can't get out of the hotel until 11 or 12 and do what we need to do for that day.
I could tell you would have got some weird looks on that plane.
Oh, absolutely.
You would have got all kinds of looks on that plane. Haram, man. I feel bad.
But that was a big sign, right? That
Yeah.
something's not quite right. And it's a funny story, but it dovetails into one of the conditions that these kids have.
Yeah.
And, at the risk of being a bit graphic, but my wife and I have it as a memory in our heads. We called it the Cordoba constipation, right? So when we went to Spain to look at Cordoba, he went through a phase where he just stopped passing stool. Kids are meant to go every day, every second day at worst.
Yeah.
He was constipated for 5 days on that trip.
Oh,
and we could not in any way get him to do a poop.
Right.
Now, we know that obviously constipation causes pain. And as we found out in the months following, constipation is a huge challenge with autistic kids. Right?
Really?
Gastrointestinal disease is a massive comorbidity with autistic children.
So this is like I would never in a million years assume that those two things are related in any way.
Yeah,
So,
and we'll go down a rabbit hole there because
Yeah.
that's actually one of the biggest challenges with my older son. And so we'll talk about that a little bit in terms of where that's taken us. But so that happened. And the reason we call it Cordoba was that he finally went in Cordoba. And it was massive in size and it was very, very hard. And it's like a human couldn't process that. How is a kid building this up in his system? Like it was actually ridiculous, right? Anyway, so we got that out and it was a bit of a relief and he stopped crying a little bit after that.
Alhamdulillah.
But in hindsight, again, a lot of this was gut distress that this kid was feeling on these trips and the general bodily dysfunction that's now happening as part of his autistic condition.
Right.
And all of this is happening. And so we come back from that trip, we settle back over here, and his sleep cycle is completely out of whack for weeks on end. And it was when we decided to say, hang on, we've got to do something about this, right? Like, let's go to a doctor.
Something's not right.
Something's not right.
Okay.
And it was when my mum said, Faraz, when you go to the doctor, also ask, why has he started to become so lazy? Why has he started to lose so much energy? Just lying on the floor in the lounge room. Like this was a kid who used to walk around, run around.
Yeah.
And why has he stopped saying words? Right? And by that time it hadn't fully disappeared. A lot of the words had gone, but we're just like, look, he's had a very traumatic trip. The jet lag has killed him. The teething is killing him. But it was when another thing clicked, which was, why is he repeatedly saying certain words over and over? Right? Which again, it's one of those things that if you are even a little bit educated, you'll pause and reflect.
Right.
And so, again, we don't know where he picked it up, but there was this one word, he used to just say kung over and over, kung, right? Kung, kung.
Right.
He picked it up on some YouTube. And he's just saying it literally 100 times. He's just sitting there saying kung, kung, kung. And I was like, yeah, it's very cute, it's weird, it's obsessive.
Yeah.
But my mum raised it and she, why does he keep saying this word over and over again, right? And something happened on that day. Like my wife and I exchanged glances. Parents went somewhere. We live with my parents in the old Indian sort of arrangement. And she started looking on her phone as you do, right? And about 20 minutes later, I came back to the living room and she had tears in her eyes. And she goes, Faraz, I think this is autism. And I didn't even know what that condition was, right? So my wife has a pharmacy background. She's a lot more familiar with this stuff. And then I'm like, okay.
So let me pause you there for a second. So everything you've set up until now. So I'm a parent. I have 3 kids. And so obviously I've been through the teething. I've been through the terrible twos. I've been through the sleeping and all of that. Everything you said thus far, I would never in a million years think autism. I would think...
And on its own, it wouldn't be.
Yeah, I would think teething. I would think sleep. All the things that you thought, that's exactly what I would think being an experienced parent. So tell me about that day when your wife...
Yeah, I remember exactly where we were standing, the expression on her face, how I responded, what we did afterwards. But she said, there's this condition. It's basically where kids not just fall behind, but they have a lifelong impairment. It's driven by a neurological condition, which no one understands fully. But, it's got certain markers and it's got certain indicators and it's got certain signs to pick up. And I think Issa has all of them, or has a lot of them.
I had pre-written a question here. Is what was your reaction? So at that point, before you had been to the doctor, when your wife had just done some Googling, and obviously she's a pharmacist, did you think, God, she could be right? Or did you think, that's ridiculous?
I thought in that moment, I have no idea what she's talking about. I'll be very honest. Because I literally, until that point, I don't even remember. Of course, I'd heard it somewhere and it had been said in some, but I don't remember registering the word autism and understanding what it means. Just like in modern day parlance, you hear words all the time. Might be a lawyer talking, might be a psychiatrist, like stuff that's not your field, which you're not that interested in. And I'd heard it somewhere, but I had never stopped to think, what is autism? That was my reaction. So the first thing, of course, I did was Google it.
Start reading.
And she was right. There was a lot of stuff that that indicated towards it. But then there was also other things which were like, oh, no, he doesn't have that, right? This is a good sign. He does this. He doesn't do this. He does this. He doesn't do this. So it became like this. Next few days were just all about reading, right? Reading, everything that I could get my hands on.
Yeah.
Ahead of the GP appointment that we had, which was going to then open up doors for specialists and the rest of it, right?
And I assume while this is all going on, you're still going to work. You still got your normal responsibilities.
That's right.
And okay.
So I'd started the new job by then after that overseas trip. And so even at work, I was quite emotionally affected in this early part of this new job, but it wasn't quite at the point where I was like, it is autism, right?
Yeah.
There was actually denial at the start. And that was like every sign that showed us otherwise, we were like, aha, especially me. I was like, oh, hang on a second. That's
you were
fine.
like grasping onto that.
Grasping onto that, right? Even as others indicated that, it's leading that way. But in all honesty, there was a part of me that was like, okay, we clearly don't know, and time will tell. And that, at that age, 2.5, is the earliest age at which they'll even engage the discussion.
Right.
Whether it can be. And they say we typically will not give a diagnosis until about 3.5 or 3.
Right.
So initially, they're very reluctant because a lot can change in the brain at that time.
Okay.
Right? So it wasn't just me. It was doctors take that approach as well.
Yeah, okay. So you weren't late in figuring out what was going on.
We were actually on the earlier
You were
end.
early,
Yeah,
right,
we were early.
okay.
But I guess some of those things were also quite obvious because, and here's the thing, when you start to familiarize yourselves with what kids should be doing, right? Again, first-time parenting, then it becomes evident that there's a lot missing, right? So kids should be, and this is the biggest one, should be responding to their name by 18 months.
Right, okay.
Right? They should be responding. When you say their name, they should have registered, the brain should have registered that, hang on, that's
This
me.
is me, yeah.
Right? And they'll turn around. And when we started doing, that was the biggest one. I mean, you can imagine, we were doing this 50 times a day now. Isa, poke head up from the kitchen. Isa, is he responding? Oh, he responded. He turned around. But was he responding to the sound? Was he responding to the fact that it was his name? What was he responding to, right? So there was these paranoid things going on at home where all the parents, the grandparents...
SubhanAllah, man, I can't even imagine that emotionally for you and your wife, at this stage when you had done the Googling but you hadn't gotten a diagnosis yet, it must have been a very trying
it was
time.
And from the point that it started being clear that something was not right here, that's when it became really difficult. And that was, and keep in mind, these sleep issues have not resolved. So I'm going into this new job often late because I'm literally up in the middle of the night. I'm tired. And we had the second son who by now was, how old was he? He was 9 months.
9 months.
And he was his own child, waking up, being fed in the middle of the night and all that sort of stuff. So I was going to have to go to Isa as my wife fed this one, breastfeeding. So it was very, very challenging. These early days were very challenging. And as the weeks went, we're talking on a week's time frame, because that's how our opinion changed, it was evident that something was up.
Right, okay.
And so over those period of a few weeks, the early part of that new job was supremely testing. It was a very, very difficult time.
I'm sure. Look, starting a new job is testing on its own, even if everything else is going right. But having this sort of uncertainty and the look in your wife's eyes and all of that sort of thing, it must have been very tough. May Allah make it easy for you, inshallah. So you eventually went to the doctor to chase this diagnosis. Was it an obvious, quick yes, or did the doctors take a long time to sort of figure out what was going on?
So what we did was we had a family friend who was a pediatrician, a developmental pediatrician. So they're actually responsible for being the gateway to diagnosing these sorts of things,
right?
Or hooking you up with specialists in childhood psychiatry. So our actual GP, or one of our GPs, he actually took us backwards. He said, "I'm sure this is not autism."
Wow!
And that it is too early, right? And you guys are being paranoid, right? Because he inspected him and he thought he was doing enough, but he was not an expert in this stuff. And in hindsight, he wasn't looking for the right stuff. Even though he was very confident, great brother, great Muslim, he was a very, very good doctor, elderly, quite old, but very charismatic, very, very relatable, right? So we felt very confident in his presence.
Right. But he was dead wrong.
He was dead wrong. He was 100% wrong. Now, thankfully, because we had a family friend in our network who was a lot more qualified, we insisted on getting the referral. Right. So we got the referral. We went to that doctor, and he too said, look, it can go either way. I can definitely see what you're concerned about, but it can go either way. And it is not as obvious as I've seen in other kids, even earlier. So I'll give you that much.
So when doctor number one... And honestly, this happens so much where doctors get it completely wrong, and it's happened with my kids. The amount of I'm no doctor, and neither is my wife. The amount of times we have Googled and figured out what's wrong with our own kids when doctors have told us wrong thing is beyond me.
Yes.
But when that first doctor said, "You're being ridiculous, it's not autism," I gotta ask, what was the reaction within your wife? What was the conversation at home when you had these concerns and the doctor said, no, you're being silly. It's not autism.
I think it was a little bit of relief at that time, but and this was the key thing. The key thing that I had picked up in my reading and research was that time will tell, right? And it can go either way. And so I wasn't willing to write him off, nor was I willing to put all my eggs in that basket.
Right.
So I was sort of, by that stage, I had enough of an understanding that this thing is actually quite dynamic. And this is the key phase that we're in. The next half a year to a year is where it really will emerge as to what this is. And we ought not to hold it against anyone who could get it wrong in this phase.
Yeah.
And I kept saying we have to get other opinions and we have to be careful and judicious about how we go about this, right? So to our credit in hindsight, we didn't put too much weight on that one.
So it sounds like you were very sort of, logical brain and turned up to 100% with this.
Yes, it had to.
Was it the same for your wife, or was alhamdulillah.
And that was because she had a pharmacy background. She had a medical sciences background, and she knew how the system works a little bit better than I do. Relative to what we know now about health, medicine, all that sort of stuff, we knew a very, very small amount, because we can be very, very skeptical of what I would call the mainstream medical system, and that's not in sort of some sort of quack sort of way. I think in a very nuanced way, where we see where it's got its role, we see where it's got huge shortcomings, and we see where it's systemic, right? It's driven by government incentives and Medicare and all the rest of it, and just how health is not seen in our modern society as something that ought to be looked at holistically, but in a very atomized sort of way, right? You've got a headache, take a painkiller for that, right? You've got a leg ache, do that. You're not asking what is the root cause of
the headache medicine gives you a stomach ache, take another pill.
Exactly
the stomach ache causes cramps, take another pill. And before you know it.
Exactly. But that's a huge journey that we've had. So to go back to your answer, I didn't put too much stock in that one opinion. It gave me temporary relief. But what's temporary relief when you go back home and he's repeating words, or he's losing his vocabulary, or he's doing things which clearly the websites say he should not be doing if he's not to be on the autism spectrum. So for us it was, okay, let's get to that specialist, which we did. And he said, look, there's cause for concern here. Let me give you a global development delay diagnosis, right?
What does that mean?
So that means that globally, meaning from the bodily perspective, all your bodily systems...
Not globally like planet Earth.
No. Your child's global milestones are delayed. So global development delay, he's overall delayed in his development.
Right, okay.
There's signs everywhere. Cognitively, physically, he should be able to use his fingers to do, thread a needle, or whatever, like at that age. He's not being able to do that, right? He's not responding to me. He's not playing with me as human beings ought to play with each other. He's not engaging with me. His gaze is not there, right? So
so he's not looking at you.
That's right. That is one of the biggest ones, right? Eye contact. Can this kid have eye contact with you? Because again, that one of the three pillars that I mentioned of deficiency, one of them is social relatability.
Right.
And human beings do that through eye contact. Because for many of these kids, you're just
a blob,
right? Just like a chair or whatever. Yeah. They don't get that this is another human like me. I can relate to them. For that reason, if they don't have eye contact, then that's a telltale sign that something is going on over there.
Right, subhanAllah.
So no matter what these doctors said, that reality didn't change. And so I insisted we get that diagnosis. SubhanAllah, the NDIS was getting started at that time. It was literally in its trial phase. Right. And so kids who got the GDD diagnosis were eligible straight away to be part of the first phase of the NDIS. So he said to us, I'll give you this GDD diagnosis, go apply to be on the NDIS, which is a 6-month thing in itself, before you get a package. So this was like eligibility for the NDIS.
Oh, so this is very early days.
Very early days. So this is 2016, end of 2016. So we did that. We got an NDIS number, which allowed us to then engage one of their planners to start putting together a plan for us and all the rest of it. So that was the good thing about that. So these months pass, very, very difficult months. The first 6 months were because the sleep was the biggest challenge, right? 4 or 5 hours every single night. We used to have a sleep Excel sheet where we were recording his sleep. And it was a miracle on a day where he slept the whole night. A miracle, right? So we're talking 5-6 months where this kid is up for that long, almost every single night. And this is before the real issues, the real physical health and gut health issues really started with him. He gets to about 3, and lo and behold, it is autism, right? That same doctor that we went back to, he said, look, this
confirm.
is what it is. In fact, actually, we went to sort another pediatrician's opinion, and he said, look, guys, this was a very interesting doctor, right? He was very sort of by the book type of doctor. Not very holistic in some ways, right? But he was one of the ones who had consulted to the government for many decades on childhood psychiatry. And he said, we have advocated and fought for parents like you to get funding if they get a label. I'm saying to you, go get the label, unlock the funding that is open to you. So go back to that pediatrician. I want you to get the diagnosis from him because he's your primary sort of doctor here.
Right.
And that was when the penny dropped. 3 years of age, just over. And I knew then life will never be the same.
That's it.
So we went back to that doctor and said, look, this more senior doctor has said you ought to give this. And he said, let's go ahead. And that's when we went to
SubhanAllah, what a journey. So it's about 6 or 7 months of from the beginning of realizing something was not right to actually getting the penny dropping and saying, okay. Yeah. Look, if I ask any questions that you don't want to answer, it's
no,
okay.
I'm
so I'm sure that there would have been a conversation between you and your wife, maybe when the kids are in bed at that time. What was that like? And was there a moment there where you, even if you didn't say it out loud, was there a moment where you kind of thought, why us? Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Intro to Islam. Intro to Islam is an organization that's been running free classes for non-Muslims and new Muslims for over 10 years. Alhamdulillah, more than 600 people have accepted Islam through this initiative, and we've got classes in Adelaide, Melbourne, and Sydney. When COVID happened, we also started hosting our classes on Zoom, and now we have more than 400 active students watching from all over the world every single week. Our website has just got a revamp. It's introtoislam.org, and there's a lot of cool stuff you can do there. You can sign up for free classes, whether you prefer face-to-face or on Zoom. It's all available there. You can also sponsor a new Muslim, which means that you can pay for all of the books, prayer mats, and tuition for a new Muslim or a non-Muslim to come and learn about Islam and hopefully accept Islam by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can also do something brand new, which is to study online. We've spent the last year pre-recording a lot of our lectures, complete with PowerPoint slides and everything else, so that you can study at your own pace. You can enroll in any of our classes for free. You can choose the study online option, and that way you can watch the lectures and take quizzes in your own time and complete the entire course from A to Z from the comfort of your home without anyone else being involved. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you for supporting this initiative. Remember, the website is introtoislam.org. Why me?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There was a lot of that. Inevitable, I think, in that sort of situation. And of course, the reflections with my wife were always that Allah has said He will test you.
Yes.
This is the test that's coming. Because I'd always reflected with my wife that, alhamdulillah, I feel very blessed in life. I've had it very good. I've had a very sort of reasonably good middle class upbringing, good parents, small family, so got plenty of attention in the way of effort into my sort of pursuits and sent to a very good high school, good university, good degree. Parents allowed me to take time out to sort of memorize the Quran and those sorts of things. So always got to pursue the things that I wanted to pursue in some way. And a very privileged sort of upbringing in that sense, right? Alhamdulillah. But, as one of my Quran teachers used to say, that you're taking on a huge risk here, almost were his words. You can't be engaged with the Quran and Allah not test you. And I guess that's the condition of a Muslim generally, right? But he said, especially if you've got any pretensions to being a person of the Quran, whatever that looks like. That could be you memorize it, then you forget it, so you tried. It could be you become the foremost knowledgeable person in the world in the Quran. Wherever you are on that spectrum, right? You've made some sense of trying to connect with the book of Allah.
So your teacher was saying, if you're going to walk down this path, it's going to be rough.
Get ready. It's going to be rough.
Get ready.
That's basically what
Buckle up.
And, you think of those words at the time and it scares you. And you actually ask yourself, do I really want that life?
Yeah.
Right? Do I really want that life? And, of course, as a young person, in a snap, you'll say, of course,
yes.
bring it on. Right?
Yeah.
Walk in the path of the prophets and the ulama of old and stuff. You don't even question it. You question it for that split second where it's like, what if I become paraplegic in an accident? What will I be saying then? Right? So these things flash by you and you're like, all the things that that people around you have gone through of hardship, do you really want that? Of course, no one in my wildest dreams thought my kids would be disabled. That's not where my mind went when I was doing this with my sheikh. So things pass you by, but you know what? All right, like these are the provisions in the Quran, the stories of the prophets. That's what we learn these for.
Subhanallah, man.
So it was interesting. So we were reflecting on that. And in and of itself, if it was just the one child, it would have been one thing.
Yeah.
Where it got really challenging was in the 12 months after that point, where we went through the whole cycle a second time.
With number two.
And that's where psychologically, mental health-wise, I went through my toughest phases, I think. But we'll come to that.
We're going to talk about mental health, but I actually want to tell you something that I've never told you this before. I never told anyone. I actually didn't even realize it until the last week of sort of getting mentally ready for today's show. You and I probably wouldn't be friends if your kids were not autistic. I don't think I've ever told you this.
No.
So you and I met a few years ago. There was a business meeting, community meeting, dawah meeting, some kind of meeting. And I knew who you were and you knew who I was, but you couldn't say that we were close. We were acquaintances. And in that meeting, somehow the conversation got to the fact that you had two sons and they were both autistic. And I can't even describe to you, something snapped inside my chest at that moment. And I really felt for you, I'm getting emotional talking about it now. I really felt for you in that moment. And you probably, I'm sure you didn't realize it on the day, but you probably noticed that in the subsequent weeks and months, I would occasionally text you out of the blue, and say I'm making dua for you, I'm thinking of you. And I thought about you a lot in that 6 months after that. Fair to say you never really left my mind for that whole time. And I'm not responsible for that feeling. I'm sure Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put that feeling there for whatever reason, but I was just like, man, if I could do anything to stand by this guy, I'm going to do it. Yeah. And we sort of became closer friends through that communication, and here you are.
I remember exactly the meeting you're talking about, actually, and it always struck me afterwards as well. I do very much remember the contact, and subhanAllah, I was just sort of thinking, I've spoken to quite a few people now. I'm quite open. I'm not going to... I got past the point of hiding it. There was a time where I was very quiet about it, and I hadn't sort of come out with to the community and mentioned that I've got this, because there is a sense of responsibility that I feel, and I have not executed on that very well, because as you know very well, I've been very busy with certain things in the community and business.
Well, you do a lot, mashallah.
I wish, and maybe this is the next phase of my life. I feel I need to do a lot more. So maybe this is my opportunity, but. I felt out of all the people that I've sort of spoken to, Ahmed really has it's something has clicked in this brother.
Something
right?
happened, yeah.
And it wasn't until you once sent me a video from the Kaaba, subhanAllah. Which was, I was bawling my eyes out in tears, and I showed my wife, and I was just like, there are people out there making dua for us, right? And people like yourself and others like Sheikh Bilal Danoun, our good brother, for example, and others in the community. Look, it's when I did decide to open up about it, which was just before I went to my first Hajj, which was in the year of the diagnosis, Aisa's diagnosis, but about 6 months after that. And no one really knew until that point, except for some close friends who knew I was going through this. But in terms of the community, who I've sort of grown up in not the limelight of, but in the public domain of, really, in some ways. I've been a dad.
You're an active member of the community. People know who you are.
Quite open and sort of well known by quite a few people. That was a part of me that I had suppressed. And one thing as a person in the community that I had long felt was that I had not brought my true authentic self to the community. There's this public speaker, he does talks and debates on Islam and debates atheists and Christians and all the rest of it. Right. But who is this person really? Who is he? What are his concerns? What are his anxieties? Even though I've always felt that a genuine engagement in our community life needs to be one that's very, very honest about who we are and what are our troubles in life. Right? Yes. Because I mean, that's the lesson that we hear in the prophets, prophets and the stories, right? That the people who try to engage in conveying the message, however well they do it, however badly they do it, they're human beings, and they have real issues that they go through and real tests that they face, which actually have lessons beyond just them for the people around them in terms of 100%. How they can help those people. And so when I see, many people in our community, many speakers, brothers and sisters, and they speak about the challenges that they've been through, it actually humanizes the struggle a lot more. And so, it's well and good for someone to be given Quran lessons in the abstract, if everything's hunky-dory. But if that person's got an autoimmune condition that they're struggling through every day, and this sister nonetheless holds halaqat for 300 sisters over Zoom, day in, day out, how much more does a person resonate with?
And look, the thing is, it's really great that you say that. One of the main reasons I wanted to have you on the show was actually to educate me, but also for anybody watching, not just about autism, but about just challenges in general. And I think it's important for people to know that even people in the public sphere, even well-known speakers, mashayikh, muftis, whoever it is, these are real human beings. And so before I did the first episode of this podcast, I did a bit of a test where I did a radio show with a few brothers, and I really didn't like it because everyone had come prepared with basically a short khutbah and verses of the Quran that they had looked up and hadiths that they have looked up, which there's nothing wrong with that, but everybody sort of had this pre-prepared speech that they wanted to give on air, and that was the show. we didn't really get to know who these people were or what they're going through or who they really are. So I think it's important for us to, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does in the Quran, to show the tough times. Like, when I asked you, was there a moment where you thought, why me? A lot of people might be embarrassed to say yes. But I could tell you, I personally had a health condition a while ago that was affecting my memory over 10 years ago. It got to the point where I couldn't remember what happened 24 hours ago. And I was really depressed because I thought, I can't function as a human being. How am I going to work? How am I going to provide for my family? And there was a moment where I was like, why me? Yeah. And it was only after I went and talked to some really good brothers and really good mashaykh that they sort of set me straight. And then I accepted the qadr of Allah, and alhamdulillah, lo and behold, shortly after that, we found a treatment for me. But, showing that you stumble sometimes is not a bad thing. Showing that you stumble, but you've learned from it or you've grown from it is a beautiful thing. And I really, I have so much respect for you and your wife. Alhamdulillah.
I didn't even say that much on that particular point, but, I will say, and I've said this before, is that, for many of us who are in the da'wah field and who engage in polemics, which is what I used to do, polemics not in the negative sense, in the sort of argumentation for Islam.
Yeah, debates.
One of the easiest problems, one of the logical problems that I felt was the easiest to deal with was the problem of evil, right? The logical problem of evil, right? And I used to just, as a young da'i and many of the du'at around me, were just like, really? Like, really? Like, people are going to question the existence of God over something like this? How can they not see that the existence of evil is not contradictory to the existence of God?
Yeah, so you're talking about just for those watching at home, you're talking about the argument that if God exists, why is there so much evil in the world? Evil,
yeah. So there's they call it the logical problem of evil, and then there's the emotional problem of evil, right? And the more nuanced people, they go, hang on, that is easy. How do you deal with that? And what that's saying is, why would God let certain things happen? Yeah, so that's what they say.
So
right?
again, just to break it down, because you're going very fast. Maybe some people not following you. Yeah. So the first question is, if God exists, why is there evil in the world? Right. And the easy answer is, well, the evil is perpetrated by human beings, not by God. So it's human beings disobeying God.
Or that God puts it as a test for human beings and so on and so forth.
Right, or that. So then you say, okay, well, evil exists because people do bad things to each other. And then you think, okay, well, now the emotional question is, but if God exists, why would he let that happen? Exactly. Why would he let people murder other people?
Through that? Yeah.
Why would he let people rape other people? Yeah. And so that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
Why would he inflict, in my case, why would he inflict disability on kids that have never done anything wrong? These ma'soom children, right? Yeah. Why would that happen, right? And it's not, you don't sort of go from there, na'udhu billah, to say, therefore God does not exist. Yeah. Right? You're in a very... In a very beleaguered sort of way, you're trying to come to terms with why has he done this to them and why has he done this to me?
Kind of thinking, I don't understand.
Yes. Yeah. And that's really what it is, right? It's like, I really cannot come to terms with this, right? And of course, that's when you're forced to deal with. It's like, aha, now you understand those verses. أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ, right? That's when the penny dropped for me. It was it's very easy in that madrasa when 20 kids around you are rocking back and forth, memorizing the Quran and that beautiful melody and so forth, and this sheikh saying, are you ready? Are you ready for this path, right? It's very easy in that moment. You're in a high, you're in a space where, you're not being tested. But now it's very different. You're in the middle of the night. It's 3 a.m. Your child is screaming at the top of his lungs because he's got something and he cannot communicate. You do not know what it is, right? And next day, you've got an appointment with the doctor investigating your second child for the same condition. 12, 24 months after what you've been through.
I can't imagine. Right? I can't imagine. Look, like you said, it's very easy. It's very easy to stand on the minbar when, alhamdulillah, your life is perfect and say, we're all going to be tested. Absolutely. That's a very different thing from, like someone like Prophet Ayub, who had all these things happen, lost all his kids, buried all his children, lost all his wealth, lost his health. People couldn't stand to be near him. For him to stand up and say, you're going to be tested, that's very different to someone living in the cushy Sydney suburbs saying you're going to be tested.
And honestly, it was in those moments where, through the ups and downs of those probably 2 years, where I really came to terms with, I think, the essence of what this deen is all about, like really at that time. Yeah. And ironically, despite, I think, feeling the most connected, I've had huge downs since then. Because for practical reasons, I've been so engulfed, the only way I can put it is engulfed in the worries of the dunya, right? I founded and got involved in a very substantial business that's been helping a lot of organizations in our community, which for practical reasons, not because my heart wasn't there with the deen, but for practical reasons in terms of how much it took from me in terms of time, took me away from building on those lessons to go the next step up in my da'wah and my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So ironically, even after coming to terms with what I think was the essence of trials and tribulations in Islam, I feel it was like a secondary test from Allah. On top of that, it was like, okay, you get it now, but what are you going to dedicate to me? And instead, I got pulled down this path of being very sort of concerned about, you know, making this thing work. And that was actually for my children. And that's another segue we can perhaps explore. But it was like, you know, I created something for the sake of my children, knowing that these kids were probably never going to be able to look after themselves, right?
Right. So you kind of went into
problem-solving mode.
Okay, my kids are not going to be able to work. They're not going to be able to earn a living. I have to make a lot more money to sort of secure their future well-being. And so at this point, you and I had sort of come into each other's spheres again. So I wanted to ask you, did the realization of the seriousness of the boy's conditions, because at that point, I got to tell you, when I saw you at that point, mashallah, you struck me as one of the hardest working people that I've ever met. And I like this expression that the founder of the car company Rimac is a Croatian guy. He's talking about Elon Musk, and he said Elon Musk doesn't have to work a day for the rest of his life, but he's absolutely crushing himself to achieve things that he wants to achieve. So this term, crushing himself, that's what came to mind when I saw how hard you were working on your endeavor. Would you say, and feel free to think about this a little bit, would you say part of that definitely was securing things financially for your kids? Would you say part of that is also burying yourself in the work so that you're not thinking about as much what's happening at home?
In hindsight, absolutely. And the only reason I'm not thinking as much before answering you is because this is something I've been working through with, I guess, the professional support that I've sought to come to terms with this, which is something that I started doing a couple of years ago. But in the midst of running a business the size of what we had built, I didn't do that exploration justice. And it's only been recently, after some things have happened, where I've sort of made certain mistakes, again, in this sort of really deep quagmire of worrying about the material side of things and perhaps letting that take you places where you would never have otherwise gone. It was off the rebound of that I sort of came to the realization I really need to pull up, and there's certain things that I really need to get right in my understanding of myself, in my understanding of why I'm operating the way that I'm operating, why I look so little after myself, and yet I'm willing to do so much for certain sort of things around me. People could say entities like the business, for example.
Community entities.
Whatever it is. Why am I willing to do absurd things for them? And yet my own physical health, for instance, doesn't get a look in. My own mental health doesn't get a look in. I sleep on 4 or 5 hours, and I'll do that for weeks or months on end. And we all know the compound health issues that creates. So to understand that, I've been seeing a really, really good psychologist rather, and it's actually been very eye-opening, right? In terms of that, and I think definitely there's an element of when you're going through something that difficult and you're a solution-oriented individual like I always have been, you'll find repose in working the solution, as opposed to really confronting the day in, day out of what you're facing, and I guess thinking about it, coming to real deep realization of the reality of it and acceptance of it. So you don't truly accept. You kick the can of acceptance down the road. Right?
You say, I'll accept it later, but right now I need to focus on
something.
This.
Exactly right. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, that was me, right?
Well, look, this is a really big topic for men. Definitely everybody feels stress. I'm not taking anything away from that. You don't need to message me and say, what about the sisters? Everybody feels stress. But I got to say, for men who the burden of providing for the family is solely upon them. So I'm talking about single income, husband works, wife doesn't work, households. Sometimes life really beats you up. And, as you said, you're definitely going to be tested. Sometimes we don't allow ourselves the luxury or the comfort to really take care of what's going on. And instead, like you said, we jump into solution mode. We get busy. I remember there was a sister and a brother and sister that they used to live on a farm. And the sister spoke to me and my wife complaining about her husband. They were having some marital issues, and she says every time we have a fight and we get stressed out, he goes and cuts the grass.
Yeah.
And it's such a fascinating metaphor for exactly what men do when things get hard. we want to get busy. We want to be doing something productive. We want to renovate the house, cut the grass,
clean the room,
fix the table that's rocking, clean the room, go to work on that PowerPoint, do that Excel, and sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes you're really just, like you said, postponing dealing with how you feel mentally, emotionally, just to feel like you're doing something productive, just to feel like you're still winning, so to speak. And it eventually catches up with you. And I really don't think I know any man, working man, who hasn't been in that situation at least once, where there's a lot to deal with, there's a lot to process, and you can't deal with it at the moment for whatever reason, and so you go and get busy to still feel like you are doing the right thing by your wife, doing the right thing by your children, doing the right thing for your family, for your community, whatever it is. And so you just, back to that term, just crushing yourself just to keep your head above water. And I think something that a lot of men need to realize is you can still work and be productive, but you definitely have to, whether it's with your favorite sheikh, your best friend, a mental health professional, who I have also seen from time to time, to get, it's no different seeing a mental health professional than seeing a very wise sheikh who really has got the life experience to give you good advice. It's no different. One has a set of Islamic tools and one has a set of scientific tools, medical tools, and some of them have both, and they're the best people to see. So I really applaud you and admire you so much for talking about this. But I don't want you to be talking about this just for everyone to know Faraz's story, although it's a fascinating story. I really want anyone watching to understand that if you're going through something stressful, traumatic, you don't have to crush yourself in order to postpone the dealing of that stuff that's happening to you.
I mean, look, in hindsight, I think it's hard to emphasize how important that is.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not a model in that regard. Like I've learnt the very, very hard way. Hopefully it's a lesson I'll only need to learn once.
Inshallah. We all hope for all of us, inshallah.
Yeah, but really I think it got me to some places which are very dangerous, I suppose, for myself and for others around me as well. Very, very frankly. Like for myself, like the physical health issues that I've been through in the last 12 to 18 months. And singularly, I think they go back to stress. Really, like in hindsight, with all the specialists I've seen, the experts I've seen, the blood tests and everything that's been done, for them to rule one thing after the other out and for it to actually click that this is actually the life that you're living. It's your lifestyle. It's your stress, right? It's not necessarily something you're eating. It's not necessarily, but really it comes down to that. It's your body's under so much pressure and your mind is under so much pressure. There's literally no room for anything to do with you. You're working 10 hours on the weekend each day.
Wow.
Right?
And forget the weekdays.
So like the human body is not meant to work like that. It's not meant to operate like that. And there's definitely an element of burying the difficult things that you have to deal with in life so that you can just be working through lists methodically. And towards the end, it wasn't even methodically, but chaotically. Because you're so stressed about the fact that it never ends that that you'll then put off dealing with other really important issues because you just want to minimize stress in your life. You're like, I want as little of that as possible. I'll just, we'll leave that for another time. Right? There's your sister's going through something, for example, right? And whatever, as an example, I'm not saying she is. She's a wonderful part of my life, but she might have some issues in her life. My cousins might have some issues. My old high school friends might have issues that they're going through, right? But your own stress bucket is so full and overflowing, you literally will postpone in any way anything that adds to that. And in the process, your own condition, your own well-being is one of that, because staring in the face how far away from, let's say, physical health or mental health baseline you are is confronting. And what it leads to is this deep sense of regret. It's like, how did I allow myself to do this? So you'll put off dealing with that. Because it just feels like such a deep, deep problem that how could you ever get back onto baseline? Like you've let yourself go so badly.
I think there's an element of, among, again, I'm only talking among men because that's what I can relate to. There's an element of being embarrassed that you're not dealing or you're not coping, and you don't want anyone to know how bad you feel or how terrible you feel or how alone you feel or whatever it is. And you just want to continue to be brave and put on this front that, I'm being patient through all of this and everything's fine and I'm going to get through and I put my trust in Allah. And you say all these things that you think people want to hear.
And you do say them.
Alhamdulillah,
all is well.
And what culminated in my personal experience, at the end of a similar road, obviously not quite that severe, but at the end of a similar road, I got taken to hospital in an ambulance.
SubhanAllah.
So I just collapsed.
Subhanallah.
And the thing is, there's no amount of, puffing up your chest and trying to look like you're handling it all well that matters at all at that moment where you sort of hit bottom.
Yeah.
And you think, oh yeah, okay, I screwed up here.
Yeah.
And I didn't take care of myself. After you've had that sort of fall, it seems like the normal rational thing to say, but you would never dare say that before.
Exactly.
No matter, like, if you're at 99.9% breaking point, you'll still smile and say, we'll get through this phase. We'll finish this project.
Right.
We'll close off this client.
Exactly right.
And then, we're going to get through. Everything's going to be all right.
And that's why for the people around you, it's so befuddling, right? It's like, yesterday you were like this.
How could this happen to you?
How could this happen?
Yeah.
And, there's this concept of... what's it called? It's like the concept of a load, right?
Yeah.
That it's building. Everything seems fine. To everyone around you, it seems absolutely fine.
Yeah.
But you have been in this world with yourself where the threshold is just getting, the pressure is getting close to the threshold. And then something will happen, whether, as you said, you'll end up in the hospital in an ambulance, right? And after certain things happened, which alerted me to how severe and serious my issues were, I went and talked to a doctor. We did a bunch of tests, and he actually said, describe to me, what life you've been living. And one of them actually said, literally, I'm actually surprised you did not end up in a hospital with a mental breakdown of some sort. Right?
Yes,
like this is it's just wrong on so many levels. And he wasn't a Muslim, so he didn't put it that, but he sort of used the words that it's actually great that this has happened, so you can now actually do something about it, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, since then, there's been an Islamic component, physical health, mental health, and all that sort of stuff. But
and now you're sort of doing that holistic.
You have to
review of your life.
You have to, because you realize when you get to that point that this is not the way human beings are designed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to live.
That's right.
And
That's right.
when you look at the prophets, when you look at Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, you look at anyone who's ever lived, right? You reflect and you realize that's not how life is meant to be lived, right? This like notion that, and obviously for me, it was like this absolute conviction that I'm doing this for my children, right? I'm doing this for their future because these guys will never, ever earn a dime.
I'm crushing myself for my kids.
That's right.
I'm sacrificing for my kids.
That's right. And is that a story that you've told yourself? Probably, right? In all the sort of unpeeling that we've done in sort of mapping my sort of journey with the people that I'm seeing, it's a narrative that you tell yourself, right? To put off having to deal with
how you actually feel.
Or the reality that maybe it's not that bad. Maybe you're just sort of drumming this up in your head because you're numbing other parts of your being or how you're feeling to put all your eggs into that basket, because it's a solution oriented thing, as opposed to coming to terms of the fact that you know what, yes, your kids will never earn a dime, but that literally is Allah's design. You have to come to terms with it, have sukoon with it, and put real control back in His. Subhanallah, the control is always in His hands.
Yeah,
but you think that by your work and your industry and your striving that you will affect an outcome, whereas you won't. You can't create a mosquito.
Would you agree with me that for a lot of people, men and women, I'd say especially for single income households where the man is providing, that men find it very difficult to admit when as you said, that load keeps going up and up and up. It'll hit 90%, we'll say everything's fine. It'll hit 95%, we'll say everything's fine. It'll hit 99%, we'll say everything's fine. It'll hit 99.9, we'll say everything's fine. And then one day, to the shock and surprise of everyone around us, people will collapse. Do you agree that's a hard thing for men to do, is to admit that there's a problem?
Very hard. Very hard.
Why?
It depends on the sort of person you are, but if you're a person who's seen as a bit of a leader of a pack, or someone that, whether with or without justification, people look up to in any regard, it is very, very daunting and difficult to say, I'm in a really difficult spot here. I can't handle this anymore. And I really need others to come and lift this load with me, right? Especially if, and this is where the ego comes in, right? And I'm just being completely honest and transparent. Especially when there's this sort of like perception that some people around you may have that, oh, you are exceptional, right? You've always been different. You can always carry this load. That's just how we know you. It's how you've always been. And they don't know the anxiety and stress and pressure that gets placed on someone who is seen like that, right? And who's constantly expected to keep lifting that load because he's different. He's different. He's got a different bandwidth. And you may well do.
That's such a good point.
But without balance in life, without something where you're able to get out the negative energy, where you're able to replenish and put something back into that bucket, without that, that collapse is inevitable. That
So
collapse is
let's just
inevitable.
explore that a little bit. That's a really good point. So that's not even something that had crossed my mind. So if you're working with a team professionally or in the community or DAWA or whatever, and you are seen as the guy who never buckles, never struggles. You're the one people come to when they have a problem. So when the team can't figure something out or doesn't have a solution or hits a roadblock, they know they can come to you and you'll help them navigate that problem. And you're seen as that, in that leadership role, formal or informal, all the time. It makes it even harder to say, hey, I'm not doing so good. So when you are in that formal or informal leadership position, and everyone knows they can come to you when they're struggling, and you solve their problem, they say, oh, thank you so much. I would never have thought to do it that way. Would never have thought to find a solution there. Would never have thought to call this person. And you're looked up to in that way. You feel like you're going to let everybody down if you say, I can't, or if you say, I need to take the weekend off and not work 10 hours a day on the weekend. So, it's a difficult thing. And the reason why I'm sort of staying on this topic for a while is I really encourage anyone anywhere, that if you're getting to 80%, 90% of what you can handle, it's a good time to do something about it now before it gets to that point. Because trust me, you're not going to look like you're brave or like you're all conquering or like you're the man or the woman at the point where you faint on the floor or you go to hospital in an ambulance or whatever it is, whatever hitting the bottom looks like for you. When that happens, you won't care how good you looked before. You'll just say, well, it was inevitable. I couldn't do anything about it, and now I have to sort of pick myself up. So don't let it get to that point. Is my advice.
If I can say one thing,
Please.
The trouble with this is we've all heard this.
Yeah.
Right? I had heard this too, right? That so many stories of these entrepreneurs or these leaders or whatever that get to a point where they literally collapse.
Yeah.
Right? So the big question for me is, how can we know this stuff and still find ourselves in that situation? Right?
Such a good question. To me, I think when I heard that stuff before it ever happened to me, I would always think, this doesn't apply to me.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it, right? So, but that won't happen to me. Or is it some exceptionalism that we apply to ourselves? Is it that we think we're better than that or we've got the tools to deal with that, even if deep down we're like, no, I really don't, and I'm actually in a really tough place. So that for me is a very fascinating sort of part of it, right? Sometimes they say you just got to go through the difficult stuff to figure it out, right? And there's a part of me that believes that. Sometimes that people who are sort of thinking like that, they're just going to go through it and they're going to learn the lesson the hard way. But there might be people out there, right, who actually are willing to say, hang on, I'm that close that if I go any further, I will end up in a hospital.
Yeah.
I will end up in a psychiatric ward. I will end up somewhere. I will do something to someone that's really, really egregious or whatever, right? Maybe those people can have it within them to say, you know what? There's a chance that could happen. Maybe let me call out to others to support me and be open with them about how I am feeling before something happens to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Look, at the end of the day, some people might be listening to this conversation and think, hey, maybe that's me. I'm sure there's a lot of people going to listen to this conversation and think, yeah, this is stuff that happens to other people. Even if they don't think it in terms of those particular words. But the attitude of, okay, autism is something that happens to other people. This level of stress that causes eventual collapse is something that happens to other people. My life is fine. No problem. I would say that the best advice I can give to anyone, and I would like to hear your advice also, is if you feel like you're anywhere near your limit, speak to 3 people that care about you individually and say, this is how I'm feeling. And chances are, one of those 3 or all of those 3 will take it seriously enough, respond positively enough to help you get the help you need. It doesn't work if you do it with an acquaintance. It works if you do it with your best friend, maybe your parents, maybe your spouse, someone who really knows you intimately and knows that this is not something you would say lightly, to say, hey, I really want to talk to you. I'm feeling this way. I think it's because this, and this. I'm not really sure what to do now. But you have to fight that urge to not want to appear weak, which is something that for a lot of successful people in any industry, in any field, and any gender, whatever, it's a hard thing to do because people see you as stuff a lot, the unstoppable, the indestructible figure that they might see you as or perceive you as. So that's my advice, is to just tell 3 people that care about you. What would you say?
Yeah, look, I would say on top of that you have actually got to be really open.
Yeah.
And you have to articulate your feelings. It's not the physical, practical circumstance that's the issue, is that, I'm facing this. It's, how is that making you feel?
Yeah.
Right? That is the real crux of the issue, because that's what's going to drive you to a certain place, right? Whether that is by acts of commission, meaning things that you do, omission, things that you fail to do, or how you interact with people or whatever, right? So it may be that the omission there is to look after yourself. You're just not looking after yourself at all because of how you're feeling, right? Or it's because of how you're feeling that you do certain things which you then know are wrong or regret or whatever.
Yeah.
And it could be in your interaction. Like, it could be how you relate to people. Like, you may let go of certain relationships that you shouldn't, or you build the wrong relationships or put too much weight on them, or whatever the case may be, right? So it's got to be brutally honest, or as close to as possible. Because if you're not, then you're not going to get the help that you're trying to receive, and which you need in that sort of circumstance.
Look, I definitely agree, and this is one of the reasons why I love this initiative called, Are You Okay Day? You've probably seen the yellow signs around the place. I really love that. I wish people took it a bit more seriously.
Yes, it's become a bit...
It's becoming a bit of a joke sometimes.
That's right, it has, yeah.
But I think, very recently I had a friend of mine who was... he's usually very friendly via text, and we text each other at least a couple times a week. He was being very short with me in the text messages, and I was a bit annoyed at the way he was responding to me. But I didn't respond and say, I'm annoyed. I said, are you okay? How's work? How's life? And this brother told me some things that were affecting him emotionally, and so I changed the way I was speaking to him and the way I was dealing with him. But often the behavior that we might perceive as what you just said is letting go of a relationship, or a friend who hasn't called or texted for a while, or a coworker who seems to be in a bad mood a lot, or whatever. Sometimes they're not just being a jerk. They're going through something difficult, and that's manifesting in other ways. So one of the pieces of advice I said to this brother, who I really love, I said, it might be a good idea to do some i'tikaf, where you don't take your phone and just go sleep in the masjid for 2-3 days. I think that kind of thing would be good for you. And as soon as I said it, he said, you know what, that's a brilliant idea. I might just do that. So it's, a lot of times we're quick to get mad at each other, but you never know what somebody's going through. You really don't know. And it's hard for people to talk about. So I think a little bit of extra kindness and compassion is definitely going to be good in the hasanat, and it's definitely going to make the whole situation better for everyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's when you think, having been through things yourself, even if you haven't been through things yourself, but you think of the prophetic character, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's like he could almost not be angry with anyone, right?
Wallahi, when you think about Prophet Muhammad sallam, it's hard to believe this person was real.
Yeah,
people don't understand. How could he be as kind as he was? Like, you can't wrap your mind around this stuff. Like, small example, Abu Sufyan resisted the Muslims for so long, fought against the Muslims. After the Battle of Uhud, his wife Hind mutilated the bodies of the companions, cut off their ears and noses, and then later in life, Abu Sufyan and his wife Hind both become Muslim. They have marital problems. They want counseling. They go to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. How can he sit down and look at the face of Abu Sufyan and look at the face of Hind, who murdered his uncle Hamza as well, and give them marriage advice and counseling to repair their relationship? How? I can't. People say, the other prophets had, non-Muslims, they say the other prophets had miracles. Muhammad didn't have any miracles. And man, every day of his life was a miracle. Absolutely. Every day of his life was a miracle. Absolutely. You don't understand who you're talking about. Yeah. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There will never be.
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And for me, like, reflecting back through my own experiences and stuff, it's the kindness and generosity that he displayed to people around him, knowing... Yeah. As he knew better than anyone, because he had the divine revelation that everyone is going through something. Everyone has their shaitan. Everyone has their tribulations. Everyone has their weaknesses. Everyone has stuff that they're thinking or doing or saying that they would not be proud of, but that's the human reality, right? How can you be as kind as possible to people who are going through whatever they are in their lives, and and just be compassionate, because you just don't know what someone's going through. You really, literally do not know what that person is going through.
And he always left the door open for people to become Muslim. So people fought him, insulted him, slandered him, all the rest of it, treated him in the worst ways. And he could have easily canceled these people and said, that's it. This guy's not welcome here. He's not welcome in Medina. He's never going to become Muslim. He's going to hellfire, et cetera, et cetera. He didn't do that. He always left the door open for them to eventually become Muslim. And the biggest example of that is the day of Taif, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala offered to destroy the whole place for the way they treated him. He said, no, don't do that. So his priority was not himself or his revenge or his treatment or his ego. The way he treated people, it was like everybody was his favorite. This famous hadith of Amr ibn al-As, who thought, he fully believed that he was the Prophet's favorite.
Right.
So we always mention the hadith, but we don't dig into it. He felt that way because of the way he treated him.
That's right.
He was treated in such a way that he was certain that he was the Prophet's favorite. And he waited till everyone was sitting around. And you know the story, who said, "Oh, Prophet of Allah, who's your favorite?" He said, "Aisha." He said, okay, from among the men, he said, her father. And what about after him? Umar ibn Khattab, what about after him? And then the Prophet went down the list and he said, okay, I'm not on the list. Okay, never mind. But that's the thing that we take away from that hadith is the order of who he loved. But the thing we miss is, well, how did he treat Amr ibn al-As for him to be so convinced that he must be the favorite of Rasul? And this is really what it means to be a mercy to the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Faraz, thank you so much for joining us today, Akhi.
Absolutely.
It's been thank you for educating me on autism. I know a lot more about it now than I did. And if you're sitting next to someone on a plane who has a crying infant, just don't roll your eyes or give them any weird looks.
You just never know what's going on.
You don't know what's going on. Yeah. But brother, I really commend you for talking to us very openly about this stuff. And I probably said 10 times before today, if you don't want to talk about anything, we don't have to mention it. And you always said, no, I'm happy to talk about anything. If someone else benefits from it, then that's for the sake of Allah. So I really admire you so much for being able to come on and talk with us. Jazakallah khair, brother.
Jazakumullah khair, brother. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for all your support over the years. It's to the brothers and sisters listening, Ahmed really has been one of the people in the community who's always looked out for me and regularly been in touch, not necessarily physically getting together, but through the modern means that we have available, to ask how things are going, what's the journey like at the moment, and even those exchanges, they've given so much comfort at difficult moments. And one thing I've always felt that I need to do more of is to engage more with the community about this particular issue, autism and childhood disability. And we all have our sort of ups and downs of life, and I feel I'm at a point where, inshallah, very soon I'll look forward to saying a lot more about it, educating a lot more about it. And there's so many brothers and sisters I've known in my journey in this that are doing it actually in some ways tougher from an emotional and mental perspective than I feel I have done, right? That are really down in the dumps about it. They don't know what to do. They perhaps don't have the medical networks that I had, or they don't have the family support that my family has had. So I look forward to reaching out and creating some networks and connections, and really helping other brothers and sisters going through this.
Wallahi, Akhi, that's honestly, anytime someone calls me that's going through something difficult and they finally found their way out of it, alhamdulillah, I always say to them, listen, definitely you can help someone else who doesn't have the benefit of hindsight like you have, who hasn't been through it. And you can help them to pull up before things get more difficult. So there's, inshallah, I see a lot of hasanat, inshallah, coming your way from helping people to understand about autism, about parenting, about just the difficulties of life and what they can do to you.
There's one actual thing that comes to mind when you said it's actually a very, very profound point, because it takes one to know one, as the saying goes, right? Yes. There's this very famous meme that goes around in the autism world, in the autism parents world. It's basically a well, right? And it shows that someone has fallen into that well, right? And so it's an autism parent, right? Yeah. And there's this transcription. It shows all these people lined up around the well looking in, right? It goes, the school will write a letter to the government to get extra funding to support that child. The NDIS will do X, Y, and Z. The local counsellor will do blah. The family will pray and offer support. Someone else will do this, someone else will do that. And so it says at the bottom, when this sort of diagnosis happens, people do this, people do this, people do this. But another autism parent will climb into the well and he will pull you out.
Subhanallah.
Right? And I'm not articulating it well. It's articulated so much more beautifully than that.
You're doing it.
But the idea is there, I will go in there, I will be in there in the darkness with you.
I'll be with you.
And I will bring you back out with me. And
Wallahi, brother.
I actually never, like the deepest parts of this journey, they were so dark, I did not know how I would survive. And I used to look at the rates of suicide in autism parents in America, right?
Subhanallah.
And there's these famous incidents of, very, very well known, even in Australia actually, of parents with dual or triple autism children. Very rare statistically. Dual is still a little bit more. But, and there's been this infamous instances where the entire family has done something, like they set the house on fire, they literally drove the car off a cliff. And I used to, in the early part, I was like, you know what? As bizarre as it is, I can actually understand what drove. If you don't have a lie in your life, how could you face the next 30, 40 years, right? And there have been times when I never thought that life would be livable, where I could do things that normal people do in the depths of it. And obviously, since then, I've built a business and gone and done all that stuff, but I've sort of forgotten how dark it was sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes conversations like this remind me how hard it was, that I need to go back into that darkness for someone else and need to be the person that helps for them.
And I'm sure you're going to do that, inshallah.
Inshallah.
And who, maybe the hasanat from that, when you see those hasanat on the Day of Judgment, you'll say, Alhamdulillah, that I went through all of that so I could have all of this, inshallah. Brother, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Jazakallah khair. And again, for anyone watching at home, if you're going through anything difficult, if you feel like it's hard to cope, if you're thinking about suicide, if you're looking up suicide statistics, if any of this even remotely rings a bell for you, you have to tell someone what's going on in order for people to be able to help you. I guarantee that there are people that in your life that care about you. If you tell one of those people what you're going through, and as Brother Faraz says, how you are feeling, it can be the beginning of climbing out of that darkness, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless and protect all of you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Turn on your notifications so you know when we drop the next episode. And inshallah, we'll see you next time. Assalamu alaikum.